This man is not what he seems, or perhaps even not who he seems, which is very difficult to see because it's hard to see behind a man of that beard, that cloak, and that helmet, the latter of which very conveniently can never be removed. So I want to be clear from the start that this is not my idea. A comment named Aquitas RJ posted this on one of my videos, but I do kind of like it. The basic premise is that King Harold is not dead and is in fact currently masquerading as Yarl, hiding behind that big bushy body beard and having the gag of the sword in the head and the helmet that saved him to ensure that the helmet never gets removed. Because if the helmet were to ever get removed, then it would clearly reveal Harold's scarring from the horns he had removed. But why did Harold do this? Where did the real Yarl go? And what the crap does Loki have to do with anything? Well, we're going to answer all of that, as well as some of my personal red flags regarding Yarl in general. But one big reason why I'm willing to take this idea semi-seriously is because Oda really, and I mean really, loves using a trope known as the hidden monarch, which is the idea that you place a character of great political importance somewhere in plain sight for a revelation down the line. Oh my god, he was actually the king? And Oda's use of this trope begins all the way back at Reverse Mountain with Miss Wednesday. When we met Miss Wednesday, she seemed like a comical throwaway villain who turns out to be Princess Nefertari Vivi of the Alabaster Kingdom. And this is what laid the foundation for almost every kingdom story that Oda would tell from here on out. Although it's fun to note that Miss Wednesday wasn't Oda's original intention for Vivi, he just got caught in a place where he needed Vivi to appear and decided to use Miss Wednesday to fill that role. So she was more of an accidental hidden monarch, hidden even to Oda himself. But this idea would continue in a very intentional way into Skypiea with Garnfall, a man who we thought was a mere valiant knight, but who actually turned out to be the former and I guess future god of Skypiea, which was the end to our kingdom arcs post-time skip. However, it should also be said that Shaki turned out to be a hidden monarch of Amazon Lily. But post-time skip is where this idea really takes off, because there is such a huge amount of time spent on kingdom stories as opposed to pre-time skip. For example, Dressrosa, when we were introduced to the gladiator Ricky, who seems almost like an extra who was called in to fill a space in the B block because someone important didn't show up. But of course, we later go on to learn that this is King Riku Doldo III, former and future king of Dressrosa. I have to say, Dressrosa very much overdid it with the hidden monarch concept, because it also had a hidden monarch in Viola, Rebecca, and arguably even Kuros, because he became part of the royal family. Meanwhile, on Wano, Oda gave us Komurasaki, who turned out to be gasp Princess Hiyori, as well as the insane plot twist that was Tenguyama being the former shogun of Wano, Kozuki Sukiyaki, who I would say is the character who has the most in common with this theory, as a former ruler who decided to disguise himself as a citizen. But before getting into that, I feel like I'd be remiss not to mention the most obvious example, being our very own Vinsmoke Sanji, who I spent a considerable percentage of my life reading before he was unmasked as a prince of the Germa Kingdom. And that's why ideas like this are, at least to me, more likely to be true than your usual crackpot stuff, because when it comes to hidden monarchs, no one is safe. Oda cannot help but narratively ejaculate royalty over everyone. There are of course exceptions to this. Fishman Island and Drum Island don't use this trope, but it has become extremely common across One Piece as a whole. But look, when it comes to the Elbaf example of Harold and Yarl, there's a few ways that this could have happened. The first is that there may have been an ideological clash between Harold and Yarl. I'll detail this more in a bit, but Yarl was at least, not initially, in favor of the peace plan proposed by Harold. Yarl was a very warrior, tradition-centric kind of guy man, and could have seen Harold as a threat to that philosophy. And as one of the greatest warriors of giant kind, age aside, Yarl could have stormed into the castle in a desperate attempt to save what he believes is the soul of Elbaf, quite literally because of his belief in the proud death of warriors. And so in this effort, Harold and or Loki do everything to stop Yarl but end up killing him, resulting in a bit of an ideological problem, which is that the King of Peace has just slayed Elbaf's most revered and respected warrior, which would potentially turn Yarl into a martyr for anyone else currently not on board with Harold's ideas. So what we do, right, we come up with a cunning plan to reverse that. Harold disguises himself as Yarl and turns the memory of Harold himself into the martyr, with Loki taking the blame. However, from the outside, it seems like Harold and Yarl were united, and so the people of Elbaf unite to bring their dream to fruition. But there is also a much darker idea, which is that Harold did go genuinely mad and a bit bloodlusty, maybe as an unintended effect of removing his horns, which eventually triggered a rampage that saw the deaths of the giant soldiers, as well as Yarl, who tried to valiantly stop Harold. And then what we have is a different instigator, but it ends up being the same problem to solve, with Loki perhaps taking the blame for his father's crimes and suggesting that Harold masquerade as Yarl to ensure the peace of Elbaf. And after getting into dress-ups, Loki may even have stabbed Harold in the head to 1, make sure that no one would ever try to remove the helmet and discover Harold's very easily identifiable head, and 2, to somewhat brutally lobotomize Harold and halt his rampage. And if that sword were to ever be removed, then by the vague laws of fictional pirate biology, all of those memories and feelings would come flooding back to Harold. And the same also applies to Yarl, if Yarl is Yarl, I should say. But either scenario would make what I believe to be the eventual Loki-Haradin makeup session possible, because the easiest way to have that happen is for Loki to have sacrificed his own well-being for the sake of an ideal that Haradin also believes in. You know, the very typical One Piece stuff. Oh, you sacrificed yourself for us, cry, 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 etc. Also, this video is brought to you by a paid partnership with BetterHelp, a platform designed to connect you with a licensed therapist trained to listen and provide you with helpful, unbiased advice. So therapy is something that everyone can definitely benefit from, and for me, I've always used it as a method of personal growth. There's just a lot of things that you and Google can't solve together, and you need that outside eye, a different perspective to better understand my own habits as well as develop healthier ones, which BetterHelp does very effectively, and it's incredibly easy to start. You just fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. And look, we live in a very on-demand world. A couple of days, that doesn't sound fast. But in the world of therapy, mate, it is a bullet train. Because the reality of finding a therapist near me could take months, and that's if I'm lucky. But with over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp makes sure that the therapists on the platform are well qualified. And if you're matched with one that doesn't feel like the right fit, then no worries, that's very common. And you can easily switch to another therapist that you can really connect with. Because the whole idea of BetterHelp is to make the journey of starting therapy easier. And I found it to be an absolutely brilliant resource that caters to my personal lifestyle, which not a lot of things do. So if you think you might benefit from a therapy session, then click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/grandlinereview for a 10% discount on your first month of therapy. So give BetterHelp a go and see if it's the right fit for you. But for now, it's back to you. Me. But one fairly obvious piece of evidence against this idea is that Yarl does look very, very old, and Harold did not. Although I would say that we have no idea how old Harold's portrait is. This could have been made a century or two ago when he was much, much younger. But Yarl's age is also very, how do I put this, superficial. Because you can't actually see most of any of him. His body is completely obscured by a beard, and most of his head is obscured by the helmet. Really, this is as much of Yarl as we see. So it's really just the eyes and the nose that we need to be somewhat convincing, and we could get away with this. Although I personally can't find any visual evidence to suggest that this isn't Yarl. Sometimes Oda does forget to draw the liver spots on the right side of his face during the Elbaf arc, and if that was a consistent feature, then I'd say we might be onto something. But then there's also other times when the liver spots do appear, so it's more likely to be an art error. Also, Yarl still speaks and laughs in the same way that he did previously, so I do think this idea is pretty incredibly unlikely, but still fun to think about. Although casting my mind back to the early days of Wano, I definitely feel like anyone who had dared say that Tenguyama was actually Kozuki Sukiyaki, mate, they would have been laughed right off the internet. Their ISP would have cut their connection. However, with the power of retrospect, very few people would admit to that, and instead they just say, nah bruh, it was obvious all along. I knew, I'm very clever. And the issue at hand, internet man, is your own reading comprehension. And maybe that's true, but it's probably not, because I know you. But look, putting the hidden monarch idea aside from now, there is also an idea that I consider much, much more likely, which is that Yarl is in fact Yarl, but he's a very, very bad man and a potential traitor of Elbaf. Currently, of all of the giants we know, Yarl actually has one of the greater motivations to stand against King Harold. Yarl is 408 years old. He is the oldest living giant, and when we first met him, he was actively arguing against the ideas of Mother Carmel. He was insistent that Elbaf must not forget that they are warriors. Now, to be fair to the old man, this was 63 years ago, and people can change over time. It's actually said that people grow and evolve so much that they become entirely new people every 5 years or so. So for Yarl, that's like 12 and a half new people. Who knows who he is now? But something even more impactful to Yarl than taking a sword in the brain was the death of his companion Yarl. They'd been battle partners for 300 years at that point, and Yarl wasn't so much upset that Yarl was going to die. He was upset because of the way that he was going to die. Yarl wasn't going to fall gloriously on a battlefield bathed in the blood of his enemies. None of that. Instead, what he was going to do, right, is he was going to be killed by a child throwing a tantrum because she couldn't eat semla that one day. To be quite specific, Yarl said, "A warrior is not defined by his years, but how he dies. This is an unforgivable crime." And to me, that's always been a very powerful quote and has shaped how I view the Giants of Elbaf, which is why it was more than a little surprising to actually get to the island and seeing it having undergone such a radical shift towards peace. And while I can certainly see the younger members of Elbaf taking to such an idea of peace proposed by King Harold, I have a much harder time seeing how he convinced the legend that is Yarl. And if anything, this could have instilled a genuine fear into Yarl, who, after having witnessed the undignified and not at all warrior's death of Yarl, was now starting to not only worry about himself, what happens to my soul if I can't die a dignified death, but the soul of every citizen of Elbaf. If I'm Yarl and I have this potent belief in the core of Elbaf being its warrior heritage, and more importantly, the spiritual belief in a warrior's death, then the last thing I would want to implement is a new age of peace, because this goes to the Viking beliefs of Valhalla, a hall of slain warriors who live blissfully in the afterlife. But it's an afterlife that can only be reached if a warrior has died honorably in battle. And the kind of peace that King Harold was proposing may have meant that every Elbafian warrior still alive had just lost their opportunity to enter that afterlife, and that no future generations of Elbafians would have access to it either. So again, if I'm Yarl, I'm not hugely happy with this peace business, because it's not just a threat to day-to-day society as I've lived it for the last 300 to 400 years, it's also a threat to my core spirituality. And that turns into a case where I could see Yarl having taken a stand against Harold, or even conspiring to kill him, like a coward in the shadows, because he may not have wanted Harold to die one of them glorious deaths. But it goes a lot deeper than that, and this could very well hinge on how Yarl interprets the purpose of the sun god Nika. If Yarl, for example, happened to believe in the god of destruction interpretation, then he'd also have reason to block Harold's quest for peace, believing that the path forward must be destruction, and if every giant's dream is to become Nika, then that dream would never be fulfilled in a strictly peaceful society. And just how depressing is that? To not having any hope of the world being destroyed a third time, as stated by the Harley text, which by the way was originally told to us by Yarl. And with this in mind, you could even make an argument for why Yarl allowed Charlotte Linlin to live after killing Yarl. The straightforward idea was that this was a plea from Mother Carmel, who Yarl greatly respected, and of course he would, because she also positioned herself as an emissary of the sun god, and even worked with the world government to set up that false execution where she appeared to be blessed by the sun. So it's pretty hard to ignore a request from someone so seemingly related to the deity you worship so. But also, the more we learn about Nika, the more that Charlotte Linlin actually appears to be fulfilling the destruction reading of the sun god. For one thing, the incident with Linlin occurred on the winter solstice, which was a festival dedicated to celebrating the death and rebirth of the sun. And during this festival, a god of destruction was indeed manifested through the death of Yarl, although before Yarl died, he labeled Linlin as a quote, god of disaster. However, Yarl also said, "You've made a terrible mistake, Linlin. You do not have the right to thank the sun. Even a child can only be forgiven for so much." And that's why I'm endlessly keen to find out more about this mythos, because aesthetics aside, Charlotte Linlin was kind of doing what a huge amount of giants believe the sun god is intended to do. Although Mother Carmel did use her devil fruit powers to summon a homie named Pandora to quell the fire, and then claimed that it was a miracle due to the sun god. So there's conflicting sun god narratives at play here. But let's go full conspiracy for a second. Let's say that Yarl wholeheartedly believes in the destruction reading, then even though she committed an unforgivable crime in his eyes, Linlin could be that fabled Nika, because no other child on this planet has ever been born with the same physical capabilities as her, capabilities that still have yet to be explained in any way. As far as we know, both of her parents were just regular humans, so it's almost like a religious birth narrative, that this one child was imbued with the spirit of a god of disaster, or said god chose to enter the world through that particular baby hole. And so killing someone who is potentially your god may not be seen as the greatest of ideas either, no matter how much Harudin begged Yarl to kill Linlin. Haradin yelled that Yarl must kill her, and when Yarl walked away, Haradin exclaimed, "What has become of the pride of Elbaf?" And also, as a result of this incident, Haradin's least favorite food is semla. But again, after watching Yarl, such a proud warrior, die such a pathetic death, I can definitely see Yarl not wanting that to happen to him or anyone else, even if it meant betraying King Harold. And so earlier I went over the hidden monarch trope, and while this one isn't anywhere near as common, Oda has also been liking the hidden traitor trope a lot lately as well, which is something that we did see in pre-time skip One Piece with GLR and CP9. However, Oda gave that a rest until very recently with Wano, and in fact, well, before Wano, Oda went to some pretty amazing lengths to insert Kanjuro as a traitor, and immediately after on Egghead Island, we also had York as a traitor. Back-to-back traitor stories, both incredibly successful, so if it works, why not do it a third time? And it works especially well when the traitor turns out to be a wacky and primarily comic character with a really odd quirk, like how Kanjuro apparently couldn't draw and disarmed us with that hilarity, or like how York was a bit of an airhead who served as a communal toilet for the Vegapunks. And going with that trend, perhaps a feeble old man with a sword in his head who keeps saying his hilarious catchphrase about how his helmet saved his life could very well be a traitor. But when it comes to traitors, there's usually an even darker twist. It's not just that they've been there working for their own purposes, they've usually been working with a much darker, more sinister force. Kanjuro with Orochi, York with the Five Elders, and here's the darkest possible outcome for Elbaf, which would be that Yarl was working with Mother Carmel this whole time, and everything we saw about Yarl's criticism about Carmel's ideals was overcompensating in public to seem innocent. However, the god of disaster struck, and Carmel was forced to leave Elbaf, making Yarl the primary contact of the world government, and perhaps explaining how our holy knights were able to fast travel right into Oris Castle. So look, I personally don't want to believe it. At the moment, I have a lot of trouble believing that any Elbaf giant could be a villain, even though we've been introduced to at least 3 possibilities with Loki, Harold, and now my own personal thoughts about Yarl. And in the end, this video especially is just the ravings of a lunatic on the internet, but it's also a strong credit to Oda's writing that he surprised us so many times that I am looking everywhere I can for the next one. Old Man Yarl could just be Old Man Yarl, but Oda is capable of anything, and after Kanjuro and York, I think that my initial trust in any unexplored characters is minimal at best. But you let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on Mr. Yarl?